his response was virtually. So I suppose we will keep up at this pace, at least for the immediate future. I know our August guest is going to be coming to us. Jeremy, you connected with Laura now, right? Good. So our next guest is actually is a connection through my son, who traveled to Iran with her. She's at Caltech and she's involved in some of the NASA missions. Her name is Laura Kerber, and fascinating individual who will be with us in August. And it's only because we're doing this by Zoom that we will be able to have her participate, because there's no way we could have afforded to fly her east. So tonight we have a guest after my own heart. One of my other hobbies besides amateur astronomy is music. I play the oboe in the Lansdowne Symphony Orchestra. And unfortunately, I don't see him here yet, but the president of the board of directors of the Lansdowne Symphony is one of the new members in this month's newsletter of the DVAA, Elliot Boardman. So I'm looking forward to seeing him at some point in one of these meetings. He's an eclipse chaser, and we've had some interesting conversations about astronomy, while at the same time talking about classical music and symphonies. Interestingly, it's William Herschel who discovered Uranus. Of course, I have mixed emotions about anybody discovering a planet. It seems to me the planet was there all along. So how do you get credit for discovering what was already there for a long billions of years? But that said, William Herschel was an oboist like I am. And I have his complete concertos, and I keep telling myself, oboe concertos, I keep telling myself I'm going to learn one or two of them, and maybe even record it and play it at some future meeting. We'll see. We'll see whether that happens. So let me just make one other announcement, and that is, and I have to thank Janet Rush for this. Janet suggested, and Lou graciously agreed, that we establish an astrophotography committee. And she suggested that Lou, who is a fabulous astrophotographer, who we've those of us who've been members for a few years have watched him go from a neophyte to sort of the expert he is now. And he's graciously agreed to chair the astrophotography committee. And I think Lou's already scheduled some programs for that. So thanks to Lou for taking that on. I appreciate it. I continue to expect great things. I'm just bummed that he has that stationary observatory, because basically when I went stargazing, I'd set up next to Lou. He would get things in his computer, and then I would go look for them. And actually, I know, John, you're on here. We did a couple of the Chesmont things, and you were set up next to me, and you were a great aid. So I'm going to have to find somebody else to set up next to. But thanks to everybody. Thanks to Lewis for agreeing to do that. I'm going to toss it now, and I will unmute you so you don't have to scramble for the computer. I'm going to toss it in the same order we do it when we're in Radnor. I'm going to toss it to Brian. Brian, I'm asking you to unmute and take it away.
Okay, we have 3 new members this month, plus a returning member. Please welcome John Ogden, Elliot Borgman. I did see John and Bob Nordman. I did see Bob there as well on the Zoom.
Yeah, I think John's here too.
Yes, he is. And Jan Romer is also returned as a member.
Oh, nice.
So we have, well, a total of 4, but Jan's a returning member.
That's great. Thanks, Brian. And it's amazing that we have returning and new members at a time when we are socially distancing ourselves and not actually meeting in person or having star parties. So that's definitely a good thing.
Right. Yeah, we've done quite well considering past 4 months or so.
Thanks, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
Lewis, the floor is yours.
So I just have one topic, and that is all of our data. Once again, it seems I keep coming across information about people that's not their right address or not their right email or stuff. So I'm starting a new project to get everyone's data up to date. And so every single one of you should expect to receive a postcard from me, an actual honest to goodness postcard with your name and address, and say, hey, is this good? Then we're going to get a thumbs up from you. I'm still figuring out whether we're going to do that through another postcard or online. But then the people who do not respond, we're going to track down every single one of them. So one of the things we tried to do was re-up with an astronomical league and have all the right information. And it turned out there's still missing information. So I would appreciate A, you're helping me out in this, and B, just be aware that that's coming your way.
Thanks, Liz. Let's see who's next going around. I'm going to come back to you, Nate, and I'm going to go to Janet.
Okay, so we haven't been very active on the outreach front, obviously, but we did do a few things. Both Radnor and Temple Ambler had their backyard campout events that we've participated in before, but it was virtual. So we did send them a little intro video and a PowerPoint and some links. So you know, we did try to be active with them. And a couple of us have been chatting about maybe having an event next month that would be basically everyone members of the public that were invited or that wanted to come would register ahead of time. We'd limit the attendance, and we'd do essentially a moon in the constellation show and tell with no telescopes. So we're working through the details of how that could be. And the projected site that we were thinking about is Hebner Park, which is in Collegeville. They are having other events, so it wouldn't be such a stretch for them. They're having events now. And they would limit it to 40 though. So we're not looking for a ton of DVAA volunteers, because we need to have the members of the public participate and keep our numbers down. So if that all comes together, we may do that next month.
Thanks,
That's
Janet.
it on the outreach front.
Thank you, Janet. And I'm looking down now. We'll go to you, Nate.
Hi, guys. Good to see you. I am your friendly neighborhood camping czar. And I know why Harold basically said we're going to come around to you, Nate, because next week and the following week is going to be a very busy time in the world of camping. We're camping this year up at Cherry Springs in terms of our big event. We had to kind of pick amongst a bunch of things. And because with the pandemic, well, we pretty much are going to get one shot with especially the way things are kind of looking. So we opted to go with Cherry Springs this year again. And we're going to be going with Chester County Astronomical Society. And here's how it works. We have a window between the 14th and the 24th of July. Okay, and we're trying to pick the best days during that. I just sent out an email to the overall DVAA list, kind of pointing out at least the first week what it kind of looks like, including through the weekend in terms of just general weather. And what you'll see in that email is probably this week is not exactly the best time to go. It seems to clear up around Friday, and through the weekend doesn't look bad at all. Past the weekend, maybe it's okay, but then you're starting to get to the point where the predictions become noise. So far it's looking like the weekend of the 17th is pretty good. With that in mind, the new moon is, I think, the 18th this month. So that's a Sunday. So it's probably in most of our interest to aim for that. So what would we be doing there? Cherry Springs is for those who don't know, is a state park in northern Pennsylvania that's smack dab in the middle of a really big forest. And it boasts some of the best skies east of the Mississippi. It also has two camping grounds. One is for regular camping, and the other one is the one that most of us are going to go to, which is the astronomy camping site. It costs, I believe, around $15. So what you do is you bring up, I think it's per car. So you bring up money and you put it in kind of like this drawer thing, this green box thing that's up there. And basically, the one thing that's going to be different this year is I do understand they're cleaning the bathrooms. So that's good, but it's going to be social distancing, and you take your lot. You're going to be in a line going into the bathroom. I strongly suggest bringing extra wipes, and we're not going to be sharing eyepieces and things like that because of COVID. It can be transmitted through eyes. The other thing is, Governor Wolf has mandated that if you go outside of your house, you need to be wearing a mask. So I'm going to guess that when we're up there, it's probably a good idea to, at the very least, have a mask on your person through that. If the ranger is there, definitely you don't want to mess with that. So I would definitely put it on regardless. But I mean, I think if we are respectful of each other and we're also maintaining good distance, we'll be okay. I put notes about more information and how to register in the chat for Zoom as well as the chat for YouTube. If you have any questions, you can contact me. The contact information is there. So that's my spiel.
Thank you, Nate. Looking forward to it. Keeping one eye on the weather forecast, and we'll see how much sky we get in versus clouds. I'm going to come back to Lou, who is now going to make our first official report as chair of the Astrophotography Committee. Lou, take it away.
Hey, everyone. So for anyone interested in astrophotography, I'm going to hold a tutorial or a workshop sometime in the next week or two. I put a survey out for people to, who everybody's interested, to fill out their level of expertise, software they like to use, what camera they have, et cetera, et cetera. Looks like from the response we have so far, most people are beginners, which is perfectly fine. But the first tutorial we're going to have is on how to calibrate your data. And I'm going to probably demonstrate how to use free software first, because free is good. Using Deep Sky Stacker. In the same workshop, we'll probably also go through using it in PixInsight. So the survey is open until Sunday. If you're interested, fill it out, and then we'll touch base, later on this week or the week after on a day. Probably I'm going to maybe do that tutorial on a Sunday. The other goal, and I don't know how this is going to work because Cherry Springs, if everybody's not home, but I'd like to, for all those interested, run you through a live data collection session from my observatory. Just streaming here through Zoom. But I can't really plan that until like the last minute because, you can say the weather is going to be clear 3 days from now, but that's not always the case. So that'll be a last minute thing, and I might have to do that more than once. But, you can fill out the survey and let me know what you're interested in. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Lou. And now for our viewing report. Andrew, you're on, and Jeremy, he can share a screen.
I think so. Let me, oh no, host disabled, sharing. Doesn't seem like I can share.
Hold on.
Yep.
Hang on. Okay, try again.
Alrighty. There we go. Everyone seeing that? Okay. First off, before I start, feel free to say anything in the chat in the Zoom, although I can't see that right now because I am full screen. Just so that you're aware, but I can read them afterwards if you have any questions, or Harold or Jeremy will ask them for you. And also, before I get started, I know there was some talk this week about star parties resuming because we are technically in the green phase now, so we can have public gatherings up to, I think it's 50% capacity, up to 250 people, and being outside, obviously 250 people. However, Valley Forge Park is part of the National Park Service, so they do not follow the guidelines of the state that they are in. They follow the guidelines of the federal National Park Service. So currently, Valley Forge is only open to recreational use and visiting, like for exercising, walking the dog, or visiting the historical sites. They are not allowing it for like group gatherings yet. I've been in touch with them, and they will let me know when it is possible to resume. And we've already having some discussion about, what would a star party look like if that were to happen. So that's the update on the star party. So with that gone, for those who don't know me, I'm Andrew Hitchner. I'm the observing chair for the DVAA, and this is our observing report for July 2020. And surprisingly, first order of business is an Astronomical League Award to Al Lamperti. Congrats, Al, for completing the Lunar Evolution Certificate. And I have the number 2 there because this is the number 2 certificate in the club, in the whole program. So congrats, Al. And he mentioned that this isn't an actual observing league program yet, but it will be very soon. So he kind of got like an in right at the beginning. But the Lunar Evolution Certificate, I've never heard of it. And one prerequisite is that he needed to do the lunar observing program. And this whole program is about trying to identify the different features on the moon and when those features were created. So it revolves around the 6 Apollo landing sites. So you'll go through and you will observe each of those landing sites, and then you'll look at the area surrounding it, all of the craters and such, and you'll try and guess, well, how old or at what epoch were those landing sites or were those features created. So it's pretty cool. Those landing sites were chosen for a reason, and then this observing program kind of walks you through that. So congrats, Al. And he pointed out to me, and I'll say to you, it's a great observing program to do. All of the lunar ones are great to do when you're not waiting for dark sky. So that's always fun. But to the main topic, of course, there was discussion about this earlier. And why not? It's probably the biggest thing happening right now, comet observing with comet Neowise. So this is a picture that I found. This was taken in England, and it's a great picture. This is a longer exposure than what you would see with your eye, so just caveat that. But the comet Neowise is visible to the naked eye now, and it is a great binocular object to look at and great to photograph as well. So a little bit about comet Neowise. It's named after NASA's Near-Earth Object Wide Field Infrared Survey Explorer, which was launched in March. And that system's not really to catalog all of the near-Earth objects, but it's really meant to find these objects that are dark to visible light, but that can show up in infrared. And comets are actually a great example of that, and I'll talk about that later. So comet Neowise is a long period comet. The period is an average 5,650 years. So it's slightly longer going away from the sun and slightly shorter coming towards the sun. But, if you don't see it this time, I don't think you're going to get to see it again. And it has a long period because it has a highly eccentric orbit, and I'll talk about that later too. But it reached perihelion, or the closest point to the sun, on July 3rd, and that was at a distance of 0.29 AU. So with 1 AU being the distance between the Earth and the sun. And it will reach its closest point to Earth on July 23rd, which will be about 0.7 AU. And currently it's magnitude 2 to 2.5 or so, and it should be visible to the naked eye throughout the month of July, barring no problems with the comet itself. Here's a little chart that I found describing, you know, when is everything going to be available, or when is it going to be visible. So we are here July 11th or so. It's visible in the morning twilight, about 3:20 or so. And then, like I was saying, more towards my kind of observing, it will then switch to the twilight sky around 9 o'clock or so. And it will remain then until August. So, you know, if you want to look at it this weekend, look in the morning. If you're closer to next week, then start looking around the early twilight region. And as far as where you can see it, here's a great chart. If you're wondering where I got this data, it's from a link that I sent out in the DVAA group. So go check it there. Also, I found it just by Googling Comet Neowise star chart, and this came up. It's a great star chart. So this is the path of the comet. We're starting down here, the beginning of July, coming up through Auriga towards the Ursa Major, the Big Dipper, and then off at the end of July. So July 11th is about right here, kind of in between Gemini and Auriga. So pretty easy to find. Again, naked eye, not a lot of other naked eye objects in that area. So should be able to find it easily. Here's another picture of it, a close-up. There's been talk, I've seen some people talk about if they can see two tails. I can really only see one. You could argue maybe this is one tail and that's another, but they're kind of the same color, and you would usually expect the two to be different colors. I'll talk about that later, but it's a beautiful object to look at, and it's a rare treat really to see one of these naked eye. So just in general, you know, what are comets? So comets are frozen balls of gas, rock, and dust that are orbiting the sun. They're usually not very big, usually about the size of a small town or a city or so. And the tricky part is that they only become visible on their way to the sun. So this rock and gas, you know, they're not illuminating a lot of light, or any light at all. And they're also really small, so they're not reflecting a lot of light either. So they don't become visible until they become close to the sun, where, you know, the gas starts to sublimate and then ionize, and it begins to fluoresce itself. So you're not only getting the reflected sunlight, but you're getting this fluorescent light off of the comet itself. And that's why a Neowise mission looks in the infrared to try and see some of these comets before they become visible to the naked eye or visible light. They can see it starting to warm up in the infrared. Now, most comets will be destroyed when they travel close to the sun, you know, being made up of ice and such. But we were lucky that Comet Neowise survived its trip around the sun because we happened to be on the opposite side of the sun in early July. So when it does survive its way around the sun, then it will go ejected back out to the outer solar system or so until it comes back again. And it's estimated that there are tens of billion comets, or objects that could become comets, that are orbiting the sun. So lots of these small rocks out there. So features of a comet. So there is the core of the comet, that actual physical ball of rock and gas. Ice and dust too, and they're usually dark again until they approach the sun. And even when they're close to the sun, when we're seeing it through our telescopes, you can't really see the core itself. What you're actually seeing, the big ball of light that you're seeing, is the coma, and that's the diffuse envelope around the comet of the gas that's sublimating, so it's going right from a solid to a gaseous state around the core, and then also the dust that's being blown away by the solar winds as it approaches the sun. Now, some comets will develop tails, and you can have two possible tails. You can have one tail of gas and one tail of dust. The gas tail will usually be directed straight back from the comet, and it won't usually be thick. It will be kind of thin. And this is comprised of both reflected sunlight and also fluorescent light. So it will usually be a little more bluish greenish tinted from that gas actually creating its own light from being ionized. And the dust tail usually curves away from the comet in an arc, which will separate it from the gas tail. And that's really just reflected sunlight, which gives it a more kind of brownish hue to it in photographs. And to better illustrate that, I found this great drawing. So you can see here's the coma, This central area would be the core, but again, we can't really see that because this coma is a 3D ball of gas around the core. And the dust tail kind of sweeps out in this arc here, while this gas tail is a lot thinner, but goes straight back with the comet heading in this direction and the sun kind of over in this direction. So that's the different features of the comet. You can't really talk about comets without talking about the orbits of comets, because that's usually how we classify them. So the comets all orbit the sun, and they all orbit with elliptical orbits. So they follow Kepler's laws of motion. And so they're not perfectly circular. And elliptical basically just means that it's a little ovular or in an ellipse, really. So there's two kinds of comets. There's short period comets and long period. Now the short period comets usually have a period of around 200 years or less. And these stay pretty much in the ecliptic plane or the plane as the planets. And their aphelion, or the farthest point from the sun, only really reaches to the outer planets. I think the comet, Halley comet, only goes out to like Neptune, I think. It doesn't even go out all the way to Pluto. So they're a lot closer and they visit a lot more often. Now the long period comets, of which Comet Neowise is one, they can have periods greater than 200 years. They can be up to thousands of years. Comet Neowise is about 6,000 year periods. And these are highly centric orbits. So these are even more ellipsoid than the short period ones. It means that they spin around the sun really, really fast and are really ejected out to the farther reaches of the galaxy or of the solar system before they come back around. Now, there are other comet-like objects that exist, such as in the Oort cloud or so, but these are not really periodic because they're just orbiting around the sun in a shell. And I say comet-like objects because they're really just balls of ice and dust. They don't really become a comet until they come close to the sun, and then they start doing their nice fluorescing in the tails and such. But what would happen is maybe a nice-sized object will come close to one of these objects and kind of kick it out of their Oort cloud orbit, which will then send it on the trajectory to the sun, in which case it would become a comet. And again, there's billions of these small rocks out there. So if you miss Comet Neowise, chances are you'll probably see another comet within your lifetime, but it is a rare treat. As I'll talk about now. So usually when we want to observe comets, you usually need some kind of optical equipment. Occasionally they reach naked eye brightness like Neowise, but usually we need at least binoculars to see them. They can be found using conventional charts. You need, of course, up-to-date ones, so make sure you go on the internet or the observing. If your planetarium software is connected to the internet, it will usually update with latest comets in the sky. And really just find a comet you can look at, what's in the magnitude of your equipment, and print out a chart, and then you'll go and star hop to the comet. Now, if there's no visible tail, it might be a little hard to detect what object in your field of view is the comet. So the best way of doing that, is to get a good look at the field one night and then come back another night. And then one of those quote unquote stars should have moved, and that will be the comet. And it's really fun to take pictures of these and then have them like flicker back and forth to see the moving comet through the sky. While you're observing the comets, you can do some simple observations. You can do some drawings or some descriptions, or even use the stars around the comet to estimate the magnitude. Or you can even do some more detailed observations if you like to do that. You can estimate the coma diameter or the tail length. Or you can even, if you keep revisiting the same comet, you can even do some rough orbit determination, which can be fun. And then you can check that towards like what the professionals are doing. And you can usually get pretty close. It's fun. And there's also, I didn't list them, but there's some citizen science projects that you can do for comets as well, if you like doing those more detailed observations. And speaking of like more detailed observations, there is a comet observing program from the Astronomical League. There are two categories. You can do the Silver Award, which you'll observe at least 12 different comets, and then the Gold Award, in which you'll observe and log at least 30 different comets. These logs usually include sketches or images of the comet and the description of the comet and the tail. And you need to do 2 or more observations of each comet to make sure that you've actually seen it. And to me, that's where the fun comes in, because you're going to visit the same spot and one of those objects will have moved slightly, which is pretty cool to see. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate it. So,
do I need to stop sharing? Oh,
yes. Yes, you do. There we go.
All right.
Let me turn my video back on. There I am. So I'm really excited about tonight's guest. I'm going to let Jeremy do the introductions, but every time I listen to Holst the Planets, or even I'm out there at Cherry Springs or Blue Mountain or wherever I am staring at the sky, there's a soundtrack in my head. Sometimes it's John Williams, sometimes it's Bach, but there is another experience going on in my head, and John's going to talk a little bit more about the music of the spheres in a way that I probably have never heard spoken. So Jeremy, take it away. I'm going to ask everyone else for throughput's sake, to turn off your video and turn off your mics so that John can take all the throughput he needs, since he's going to be playing some piano there. Okay, go ahead, Jeremy.
All right, and now for your main event. I feel like Michael Buffer here. And let's get ready to rumble. First, as Harold said before, next month we will have Laura Kerber, who is a research scientist at Caltech and JPL. She'll be telling us about Mars, which is a very timely topic, given that Mars will be having its opposition later this fall. This month, I'm very happy to have Dr. John Sickle with us. John is an associate professor of music at Raritan Valley Community College. He's also the conductor of the college chorale. He teaches musical theory, musical composition, history, as well as performance. He is a self-published science fiction author. He's also an avid amateur astronomer, where he's the corresponding secretary of Amateur Astronomers Incorporated in New Jersey. So John completed his Doctor of Musical Arts at Yale, as well as his master's degree at Columbia. And what he's going to tell us about tonight is movie music in space. So in other words, how music has been used to portray space in movies and TV. So without further ado, John, you can take it away.
Thank you, Jeremy. I'm impressed by how many musicians there are here, so I'm like nervous now. At AAI, where I'm normally found, I've given a series of lectures over the years about music and astronomy, and I've talked about the planets, Holst's the planets, that is. I've talked about the relationship between the two pursuits, composers who were inspired by astronomy and astronomers inspired by music, and William Herschel, who was both, and did a lecture on the sounds, or more accurately, the translations of electromagnetic signals into sound found in space, and how they've been used both scientifically and also artistically. And tonight I'm going to talk about Hollywood, basically, about how space is portrayed in the movies. So before we can talk about that, I need to find my, hold on one sec. I think I have I'm sharing the wrong thing. Hold on one second. Let's go back and do this and make a slideshow. Okay, here we go. Before we can talk about how space is portrayed in music, we need to talk about a fundamental issue, which is exactly how is it that music portrays anything. Music is the most abstract of the arts, whether you're listening to something really abstract like the art of the fugue, or romantic favorites like Tchaikovsky's Romeo and Juliet, or the great works like Baby Shark. Music is an arrangement of sonic events in time, pitches of various frequencies with differing attack, duration, and decay, arranged in time according to various metric patterns. Unless there are words, how can it express anything? And let's face it, doot, 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 doesn't really express anything anyway. So how is it that music can elicit such strong emotional responses? Does it all boil down to cultural conditioning, or is it something that is intrinsic to music? People have been arguing about this for a long, long time. And this slide, I have two great composers who were born about 20 years apart, who are giving their views on the subject. Richard Strauss, who famously wrote Also sprach Zarathustra, which you know from 2001: A Space Odyssey. He said, I want to be able to depict in music a glass of beer so accurately that every listener can tell whether it is a Pilsner or a Kulmbacher. Igor Stravinsky, on the other hand, said music is incapable of expressing anything but itself. Well, artists like to make grandiose statements like that because they get press, and as is the case with so many arguments of this sort, the answer lies somewhere in the middle. Cultural conditioning certainly does play a role. Having heard Die Walküre, for instance, so many times, and seen What's Opera Doc and Apocalypse Now so many times, you can't really hear The Ride of the Valkyries without a certain number of extra musical associations. But there also is undoubtedly acoustical science behind the emotional affects of music as well. If I play an octave, that sounds more consonant or at rest than if I play even, let's say, a major third. Right? I hope you can all hear that. That sounds more consonant than a major second, which in turn is more consonant than a half step, a minor second. Right? And there's a reason for that. It's because of the overtone series, which is kind of the fundamental property of all pitch. The overtone series is the overtones of a given frequency are created by all the whole number ratios of that frequency. And dissonant intervals have more clashing overtones than the consonant ones. And there's a grammar to tonal harmony as well. People think of harmony as just you put these two notes together vertically and they sound nice, or these two don't. But in reality, harmony has a linear dimension as well. If you play a chord progression, it gives you a sense of direction and an expected behavior for each note of the diatonic scale and the chords built on them, right? So if I do something like this, right, there's an obvious implication of what comes next. That last chord was a seventh chord built on the fifth note of the scale, the dominant seventh, and it's expected to resolve to the tonic. And, if you are of delicate sensibilities, it may be bothering you at this point that I haven't resolved it. So you can create a sense of resolution or fulfillment by resolving that chord, or you can go to a place that's close but not exactly right and confound people's expectations. That's not particularly confounding, but and then right, and bring it back home. All of that enables the development of drama at the foreground, middle ground, and background levels. So composers like Haydn, who was a good friend of William Herschel's, by the way, and Mozart and Beethoven had a perfect understanding of this process. And it's why so many later composers writing for louder and larger and more colorful orchestras have never been able to exceed a piece like, say, the finale of Beethoven's Seventh Symphony for excitement. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more, but there's not enough time. Just suffice to say that at some level, composing music is like engineering. You have to consider, metaphorically speaking, material stress tolerance, current flow, and various other design issues to get a desired emotional affect. By the way, I once said something like that to a colleague of mine who teaches engineering at my school, and I said composing is a lot like engineering, except that people don't die if you do your job badly. And he said, but they may want to. So you know, I guess that's kind of true. So film music, what does it do? You know, what purpose does it serve in a movie? Let's look at these three important roles, the first 3 points here, that music has in any kind of dramatic context. It creates a world, it creates a character, and it describes an action. These terms, by the way, come from a book called Opera as Drama by a musicologist named Joseph Kerman, which, if you're interested in opera, is a wonderful, very opinionated and curmudgeonly book. Let's look at this famous moment from Star Wars. You can all see what it is. I'm going to just pull my my mosaic to the other side here. So this is the double sunset on Tatooine, right? The world here is a desert planet with a hot sunset with this magnificent binary star hanging on the horizon. It's a world that's full of magic and adventure, that it's beyond the reach of its main character, Luke Skywalker, right? He's trapped in sort of this dull farmer's existence. And Luke, in turn, is a young man with a yearning for that heroic adventure, but a deep frustration at its unattainability. I'm using very, you know, like fancy words for Star Wars, but you get the idea. And the action in this scene is psychological. Looking at this double sunset, he feels the call of adventure and the sense of something bigger, but then remembers who he is and where he is, and he turns away in resignation. So what does the music do to create this world, this character, and this action? Let's just listen to this scene. Jeremy, you can break in if you don't hear the music, let me know. But let's... Okay, so the music there is, I think, mostly about the action, and you might be wondering, like, well, what's the action in that scene? Well, the action is he looks at the stars and he sees, you know, this possibility of adventure, and then he sort of gives up at the moment. But the music does, to some degree, fulfill all three of those roles. It creates that magical sort of nighttime atmosphere in the first few measures, and the slightly surprising modal chord that occurs when you first focus in sort of close-up on the double star. Instead of what would normally be in the key. And also the character of the melody suggests the character. It's a heroic melody. Intervals that leap up are typical of heroic melodies, as is the opening of the the main title music, right? And the melody strives upward. It reaches its climax at the tonic note, an octave higher, right? And as it reaches that note, it doesn't land on a tonic chord, but on the sixth chord, which seems to open up a door to a world that you sort of never get to, because it then pulls back in and returns kind of disappointingly to the tonic. And it doesn't hurt. There's a fourth point in my roster of what music does here. It says, and if it's a film score, music is carefully crafted to remind you of something else you already know and cash in on your cultural conditioning, right? It doesn't hurt that this melody is strikingly reminiscent of a leading motive from Wagner's Ring Cycle, associated with its Luke-like hero, Siegfried. How does it go? Let's see. Every time I listen too many times to the Star Wars, I can't remember the other one. That motive. And it's harmonically similar. So film score composers kind of walk a tightrope between originality and leading the audience exactly where the director wants them led, which means referencing familiar material. So these expressive techniques, let me move to my next slide, they were not new or are not new to film score composers. They've been around for a long time. And film score composers, at least until recent decades, took their cues from the great composers of the Romantic period, which is mainly to say the 19th century, who made this kind of programmatic writing their bread and butter. There are a huge number of examples, but I've chosen this one because I love it, and also because I can excerpt it after the first 2 minutes, since we have limited time, and because the effect is so obvious. It's a piece by the Russian composer Alexander Borodin called In the Steppes of Central Asia. This piece is a tone poem, which is a term that means a purely orchestral piece that is meant to paint a picture or tell a story. Borodin's program is a little bit of imperialist propaganda, but, never you mind. Here it is as written in the score. In the silence of the monotonous steppes of Central Asia is heard the unfamiliar sound of a peaceful Russian song. From the distance, we hear the approach of horses and camels and the bizarre and melancholy notes of an oriental melody. A caravan approaches, escorted by Russian soldiers, and continues safely on its way through the immense desert. It disappears slowly. The notes of Russian and Asiatic melodies join in a common harmony, which dies away as the caravan disappears into the distance. Okay, we get the point. We all get along, and we are your peaceful protectors, and you're very happy to have us be your peaceful protectors, right? But let's listen to the opening couple of minutes. Sorry to stop it. I always want to listen to all of everything, but we do have to move along. It's pretty easy when you listen to that to figure out which is the peaceful Russian song and which is the bizarre and melancholy Oriental melody, the one that's played by the English horn there at the end. And the caravan with its horses and camels, right, is pretty clear too. What's remarkable and remarkably economical, I guess, is the way that Borodin portrays the vastness and unchanging barrenness of the Central Asian steppes. It's a single extreme high E in the violins, a harmonic, an octave higher than that, actually, right? That's the first thing you hear. And the high register note with nothing else sounding suggests a very wide registral space, which in turn suggests space, a very big, wide, vast emptiness. This, of course, is really a portrayal of space, just space that happens to have an atmosphere and some camels in it. But if you listen to the very beginning of this piece, just the beginning, again, I have to find my cursor. There we go. It's not hard to imagine. Wait a minute. Space, the final frontier, right? It's kind of an easy translation from one to the other. You know, that's an example of this kind of painting and emotional affect in music of the past, where all of these composers, I should say, went to school on. So, how do we score outer space? Whoops, let me go back. My favorite movie of all time still is 2001: A Space Odyssey, despite the fact that it's 2020 and Pan Am has long been out of business. I saw it when I was 9. That was the year it came out, and I can confidently say that it was like one of those early experiences that nudged me most strongly in the direction of music as a career. Though Alfred North, who was a well-known film score composer, he did Spartacus and a few other movies that are well-known. Though Alfred North did write an original score for the movie, Kubrick didn't like it and used the classical pieces he'd been using to edit the movie with. And it's those those pieces that we now associate with the movie. Poor Alfred North was given basically the assignment of write something that sounds like the opening of Also Sprach Zarathustra, but isn't, which is kind of a hard thing to do. Excuse me. I want to examine specifically 3 of the scenes that use music to show space travel in very different lights. Here's the first one, probably the most famous of all. This occurs right after a hominid ancestor has thrown a bone in the air, of course, right? Okay, so this, of course, is on the Beautiful Blue Danube by Johann Strauss Jr., his most famous waltz. Johann Strauss, by the way, unrelated to Richard Strauss. Strauss is considered a classical composer today, but he was a popular artist. He was the leader of Vienna's preeminent dance band, basically, and that is important to understanding what this piece is and its place in the scene. It wasn't written as a concert piece. It was written to be danced at fancy waltz parties, basically, at imperial court balls and so on. The slow and atmospheric introduction is there to give the ladies in their gowns and the young men in their mutton chops and plumed shakos and everything else time to pair off. The actual dances begin at the moment the Pan Am Space Clipper appears in this clip, and each successive waltz tune has to have the exact same structure, phrases of the same length, so that they can be danced to properly. Everything is rules and grace and controlled motion, just like the Pan Am Space Clipper is dancing with the space station. And just as the laws of Kepler and Newton govern the way spacecraft behave in orbit and the way objects behave in orbit. There's also a German word associated with Strauss's music. It's one of those untranslatable words. The word is Gemütlichkeit, which has connotations of coziness, comfort, ease, good cheer, satisfaction. And of course, I mean, Johann Strauss is sort of like the picture in the dictionary next to the word Gemütlichkeit. It's this music colors the scene. It's music to connote space tamed and under control, an illusion which in the movie is kind of shortly to be destroyed. So the next scene I want to play, it's not the next one sequentially, but later in the movie we see a very hastily arranged mission to Jupiter, and this is a goal which in this time in which the movie is set is at the limit of possibility, and all sense of control is lost. This is another famous scene, especially given that basically nothing happens in it. We're introduced to Dave Bowman and Frank Poole and the gigantic ship that's conveying them toward the unknown, and we're also introduced, of course, to Hal. Let's just listen to some of the scene. Okay. This music, by the way, is the adagio from a Soviet-era ballet called Gayana by Aram Khachaturian. In the ballet itself, this music is meant to express the misery and confusion of the title character when she learns that her husband, who she already knew was a useless drunken brute, is also a criminal. The lamenting character of the music is communicated not only by the minor mode, but by the prominence of one of the oldest known musical memes. And music is full of memes, or motivic signifiers. In this case, it's the interval of a falling half step. The large number of falling melodic patterns. And what made by the way, that meme can be found all the way back through Mussorgsky's Boris Godunov and Tchaikovsky's Pathétique Symphony, and back through Bach, the Crucifixus from his B minor Mass, and back through Purcell and all the way to Monteverdi, that it was used for laments. What made this wonderful little piece attractive to Kubrick also was the bleakness and austerity of its scoring. Until the very last measures, there are only two voices, and by voices I mean musical lines, just the cellos and the violas. What better way to communicate the emptiness of space? The tragic character of the music, juxtaposed with the empty backdrop, the inert seeming ship, and the numbing routines of the humans within, creates a sense of almost unbearable loneliness, far different from the Gemütlichkeit of near-Earth space. By the way, of course, that scene was famously troped by George Lucas at the beginning of the original Star Wars movie, and then, of course, parodied wonderfully by Mel Brooks in Spaceballs, right? So let's look at one more scene from 2001. This scene, I couldn't find footage. I couldn't find a video that had this exact scene that I wanted. So I found a still image of it, and we'll play the music behind it. This is a scene where this transport craft is carrying a group of scientists across the surface of the moon towards, from the main base towards the mysterious monolith that's been discovered. And inside this, the scientists, Dr. Floyd, right? Dr. Floyd and his fellow scientists are inside the craft, if I remember right, eating chicken salad sandwiches. But we hear this strange and eerie music, which gets progressively more menacing. It's by the Hungarian/German composer György Ligeti, who, in my opinion, was the greatest of the European avant-gardists from the 1960s. This piece was actually written only a couple of years before the movie was made. I couldn't find, again, I couldn't find this film clip, so we have this still image, but let's listen to it. And so on. The piece, again, is about 7 minutes long. Like it says here on the slide, space, here is portrayed as being awe-inspiring and kind of menacing and very creepy. And the creepy crawly feeling of the music comes directly from what's going on in the music. it uses a signature technique of Ligeti's, which is called microcannons. And basically, it's a number of voices imitating each other at really, really close intervals, like a round, but where people are singing half a second apart instead of a couple of measures apart, so that the voices are continually going in and out of consonance and dissonance. And the long-term gesture of the piece, as you could hear, was it started from one basic pitch, an octave F, that you have in the sopranos, the altos and the tenors, and then it fans outward, reaching at a certain point a very high pitch. A ramping up of activity and complexity, which is appropriate as you are kind of ramping up the sense of mystery as you approach this strange object. Now, I picked these three particular scenes from the movie for a reason. All three depict neutral and relatively static scenes of space travel with little emphasis on the people involved. So the music in all three of these scenes is really about space. It's world-creating music. And note how differently space is portrayed: cozy and controlled, unbearably lonely, and menacing and mysterious. And then do a little thought experiment in your head and imagine switching the music up for these scenes. Imagine if the Discovery were gliding along to, the music of Johann Strauss, or the little transport was hovering above the lunar surface to the music of Khachaturian. So, now, of course, all of these pieces were pieces already written when the movie was made, as I mentioned. Most movies have original scores. That's not precisely what I meant to happen. Let's see. Should advance the slide. There we go. They have scores specifically written for them by various composers who have to capture the director's vision in music. Their role in shaping the audience's experience is similar to the cameraman's or the production design. And because they know what familiar buttons they have to press, their duty to sound is to sound like what the audience, again, already knows, so that they can exploit the cultural conditioning previously existing works have already achieved. Great film score composers are necessarily chameleons. John Williams derived the main title of Star Wars from a 1940s Ronald Reagan movie called King's Row. If you go on YouTube after this, you can hear the score and see what I mean. That original movie was scored by a 1940s Hollywood composer, Eric Horngold, because John Williams knew that George Lucas, in creating Star Wars, was paying homage to the movie serials of the 1940s. And the film score composer Jerry Goldsmith, who, when he scored Alien, he dipped liberally into the same sonic palette and coloristic palette that those avant-garde composers of the 1960s, like Ligeti, were using. So, for instance, at the beginning of the score of Alien, you can hear the strings bouncing the wood part of their bow off the ends of the string between the bridge and the tailpiece to get this kind of very creepy effect. And he also, by the way, threw in a reference from The Planets, which is probably the most ripped off piece in film score history, with The Rite of Spring being second. That's from Holst's The Planets. That's Saturn, the beginning of Saturn. And if you listen to the score to Alien, you can hear that reference right on the same pitches, by the way. Not for too long, but just enough so that your head clicks in. Let's listen. take note, by the way, of that name, Dan O'Bannon. He wrote the screenplay to Alien. We will see him a little bit later in this presentation at his more humble beginnings in the industry as an actor and a screenwriter as well. So to give you some idea of the kind of chameleon-like nature that film score composers have to have, Jerry Goldsmith also wrote the score to Patton, which is a fabulous score, and he wrote the score to Star Trek, excuse me, the motion picture, the first Star Trek movie, and that wrote what was used as the main title of Star Trek, I've got it on my brain, Star Trek: The Next Generation, and we'll hear that in a moment also. So now let's dip back into the past a little bit. One of the most pioneering film scores of science fiction movies of the past was Forbidden Planet, of course, which was based on Shakespeare's The Tempest, loosely. It was a movie that came out in 1956, and it's famous for having the first electronic score. Electronic music was cutting edge in 1956, quite literally cutting edge, because all the sounds were generated analog and had to be painstakingly cut and spliced together with razor blades and looped around multiple reel-to-reel players to make music. New technology always opens up new creative possibilities, and that in turn generates new conventions. The pioneers of electronic music, like Stockhausen and Pierre Boulez and Milton Babbitt and others of that generation, were generating their first serious works at the time that Lewis and B.B. Barron were creating the electronic tonalities of Forbidden Planet. Famously, the producers were afraid to actually call it music, so they called them electronic tonalities. About a decade later, the Beach Boys and the Beatles got in on the act with Pet Sounds and Sgt. Pepper's, respectively, and a whole new way of thinking about music was born. Electronics had previously been used only to amplify and record music. Now it was being used to generate a whole new universe of musical possibility. It's only natural that science fiction movies would look to incorporate electronic sounds into their scores, and once they did, nothing else would seem quite as futuristic. Here's the opening of Forbidden Planet. The problem for electronic music is that a common practice hadn't yet evolved that would shape audience expectations and create a sufficiently complex language of emotional affect that composers could tap into. So the score of Forbidden Planet really only communicates one thing about space and space travel, that it's futuristic, despite the presence of Leslie Nielsen. So let's turn our attention to Star Trek now, and I will say Star Trek. Again, I couldn't find a fully legal video of the opening of the original series to embed in this presentation, so instead I have a recorded recreation of the original main title, which is by Alexander Courage, without the video and without William Shatner's voiceover. But you can hear more clearly the music underlying Shatner's voice, and maybe if you hearken back to the steppes of Central Asia, you can hear the evocation of the vastness of space with the added element of upwardly surging fanfare stacked in fourths, right? Which harkens back to Jupiter, by the way, from the planets, right? And it speaks of sort of heroism and adventure here. And then the main theme, when it actually begins, well, what is it? It doesn't sound, it never sounded appropriate to me for a science fiction show. Having been an impressionable youngster in the 1960s, this music always made me think somehow of My Neighbor's Car, a commercial from some sleek and sexy car or other of the immediately post-Tailfin era, I guess. It does in some way capture the brio and naivety of the original show, I guess, and matches up well with the character of Captain Kirk. Here we go. Now let's fast forward a dozen years to the first Star Trek movie, which featured a new theme by Jerry Goldsmith, as I mentioned, and again, as I mentioned, was later used as the main title for Star Trek: The Next Generation. This theme is much more heroic and also more ponderous than that original sleek, sexy Bonneville, and it changed the character of the show completely. In its original use in the film, it turned the Enterprise into a fetish object, basically. Since we're on YouTube, I won't use the next sentence to describe what it basically is, but it's using the Enterprise as kind of a lust-inducing model almost. Let's play it and listen, and just see how that works in this scene. Because this is a scene where Captain Kirk or Admiral Kirk, as he is now, is first seeing the Enterprise again after some time. So you get the idea. It's a very different federation of planets than it was back in the days of the original TV show. Not nearly as dashing and quite a bit more heroic. But the two themes do have in common, which is the case with all dashing and heroic music, is that they strive upwards, right? Sorry. They seek to go ever higher, right? To go boldly, dare I say it, where none have gone before. And here's an interesting factoid. In the classical period, the 18th century, during the days of Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven, there was a musical term for melodies that began that way, that started by rushing upwards, like Mozart's G minor symphony, right, or Beethoven's Fifth. Sorry. Right. They were called rocket themes, which is interesting. So anyway, how many of you have seen this movie? It's been a long time since I've seen it. Cat just knocked over my chair. How about that? It's been a long time since I've seen this movie, but this film from 1974 called Dark Star is a Philip K. Dick-like dark comedy about three scruffy astronauts who crew a ship whose mission is to, if I remember correctly, to destroy planets that threaten the stability of stellar systems that might otherwise be hospitable for life. Don't ask. But this three-man crew is experiencing a bit of cabin fever and various existential crises, including having one of the intelligent bombs they use to destroy planets to become really intelligent and to have to be reasoned with lest it destroy the ship. The one line I remember from the movie is when the protagonist is advised on what to say to the bomb, and he's told, "Teach it phenomenology." Anyway, the movie begins with the crew listening to their favorite music, which is kind of in the country stoner vein. And the fancy word for this music, by the way, music that occurs within the world of the movie itself, is diegetic music. Another example would be the Cantina Band in Star Wars, right? But in this case, the diegetic music becomes the background for the opening credits, and in its own way shows space to be a lonely and nostalgic place. If you listen closely, this country music song has relativistic lyrics. In the case of this song, my baby. It's not that my baby ran over my dog and stole my pickup truck, but rather that she just got much older than I am, much faster, as observed from my frame of reference, basically. The song, by the way, is by John Carpenter, who made this movie, and years later, wrote the score for his own iconic score for Halloween. And the screenplay to this was by Dan O'Bannon, so you can see that he also graduated into bigger and better things.
Let's have some music in here, Boiler. Sure thing.
Sunshine down, but I see only one. When I think I'm over you, I find I've just begun. The years move faster than the days. There's more in the light. And how I miss those desert skies, your cool touch in the night. Kingston, Arizona, blue warm wind through your hair. My body flies the galaxies, my heart longs to be there. Kingston, Arizona, the same stars in the sky, but they seem so much kinder when we watch them, you and I.
I guess even back in the 70s, Arizona was the place for looking at the night sky. Okay, so minimalism is an aesthetic that has been a major player in concert music since the 1960s. It was born as an acoustical realization of the possibilities uncovered by the new electronic sounds of the time, and as a reaction to the academic modernism that was pervasive also at the time, at least in musical academia. Minimalist composers like Philip Glass, Steve Reich, Louis Andriessen, or Michael Nyman, and Hans Zimmer have conquered the concert hall and especially the screen. In cinema, minimalism is also a reaction against what was seen as the ham-fisted emotional telegraphing and Mickey Mousing of earlier cinematic eras. Mickey Mousing means, by the way, when you have music that too closely choreographs what's happening, too closely choreographs what's happening on the screen. So what exactly is minimalism? Minimalist music is not short in duration, nor does it necessarily lack for density of notes. The Cacciatorian Adagio is very austere, but it's absolutely not minimalistic. What minimalism is a style that builds up maximum possible density, complexity, and structure out of an absolute minimum of musical material. And in its pure form, without the harmonic grammar or linear logic that adds direction to traditional forms of music. Therefore, it creates duration without that dynamic quality, without dynamism, because dynamism is what gives music the dramatic quality that minimalism is essentially a reaction against. Most minimalist works are strongly tonal in the sense of being pitch-centered, but unlike traditional music, are at least theoretically not unidirectional. So therefore, well suited to a movie like Interstellar, which is focused on the funny effects gravity has on time, a notoriously unidirectional dimension. Minimalism is great as a tool for building up suspense as well, through the tension of inducing repetition of minimalist cells. Just that will get you hearing the same thing over and over again, right? Tension is enhanced in this scene by piling on detail on the sort of numbing repetition of the simplest possible motive. The underplaying of the action enhances the tension. Think about how this scene would have been scored if it took place in a film made in the 1950s. I should mention two things more here before, well, actually, let's listen first and then I'll close it out. Hold on.
Dr. Mann, please respond. Dr. Mann, please respond.
He doesn't know the endurance docking procedure.
Well, the autopilot does.
Not since TARS disabled it.
Nice. What's your trust setting, TARS?
Lower than yours, apparently.
Do not attempt docking. I repeat, do not attempt docking. Please respond.
Auto docking sequence withheld.
Override.
Unauthorized.
Override.
Unauthorized.
Do not attempt docking. I repeat, do not attempt docking. Please respond.
So the tension built up by repeating that one note basically is quite substantial. I just want to point out that the score to Interstellar isn't purely minimalist. The next big set piece, where Matthew McConaughey goes into the black hole, is kind of a pared down Wagnerian moment based on appoggiaturas, notes that resolve upwards like this. Right? That one's from Tchaikovsky, but and therefore is most definitely directional. If you have a chance, watch the two scenes back to back to hear the different effect. And also, the other thing is that one of the reasons why minimalism is so widely used in film scores is that it's relatively easy to fill up maximal time spans with comparatively less effort and equal effect, really, depending on what effect exactly you want. So let me get to one last example here. Perhaps the most notorious piece of avant-garde music ever written, and though I use the word music in earnest, I put the word written in quotation marks, is John Cage's Tacit, that piece that lasts 4 minutes and 33 seconds and during which the performer plays nothing. Right? I'm not here to discuss the merits of that work, but since space is the place where no one can hear you scream, silence would seem to be the perfect musical medium for depicting space. And of course, Kubrick did it in 2001 during the scene in which Bowman tries to recover Poole's body. But one of my favorite examples of film scoring is the diegetic beginning of the movie Contact. You can hear the radio signals of Earth diminishing and disappearing as we get further and further from home until there's just silence in the void. Then we're snapped back into the head of the young protagonist as she calls out for contact on a ham radio. It's not scientifically accurate because, for one thing, the synchronization of the voyage away from Earth with the diminishing radio signals is all wrong. And for another, space is full of radio signals, with or without Nixon and FDR and so on. But it does make the point pretty brilliantly. Without contact, we're all alone, calling out for connection, like little Ellie. And as the alien says to her much later in the movie, you feel so lost, so cut off, so alone, but you're not. See, in all our searching, the only thing we found that makes the emptiness bearable is each other. Let me play this scene.
You want to come with me? Clearly, I've never been there, but this feels like situation. Obviously, a major malfunction.
Well, I'm not a crook.
Robert Kennedy was shot in that ballroom.
A sniper has fired at President Kennedy.
Never done.
Something never before experienced. 1941, a date which will live in...
And we continue the season's final edition of our Maxwell House Good News in 1930. Walter Winchell. Good evening, Mr. North American. All the ships at sea. Let's go to press.
W9 GFO. CQ, this is W9GFO here. Come back. CQ, CQ, this is W9GFO here. Come back.
There we go. So here we are on Zoom making contact, I guess. One more point counterpoint for the last slide here. The quote by Nietzsche is, "Without music, life would be a mistake," which is answered by the quote from Aaron Copland, "If a literary man puts two words together about music, one of them will be wrong." All right, thank you all. I'm going to unshare my screen, and I guess if people have questions, I am here. Hold on. There we go.
John, that was fabulous. Let's see if, I guess people can raise their hands.
I'm going to open my window again.
Don't let the cat out. If somebody's got questions, raise your hand and I'll look at the screen, and or unmute yourself and go first when you're ready. Everybody's speechless.
Sorry.
I'll start it
Music
off.
can do that. Well, it looks like you got
this is Lewis. Thank you so much. It's really, really great. And so we noticed sort of a theme. My wife and I, as we were listening to this, that the movement of music in early movies into later movies. Do you see a theme continuing, or have you seen a theme of how composers are addressing?
There has been a movement away from that kind of mirrored what was happening in concert music, a movement away from the romanticism and the directionality of and the sort of kind of like ham-fisted emoting, which is the way it was seen, that you have in like early film scores through, let's say, the 40s and 50s, when most of the composers who wrote them were many of them, I should say, not most, were refugees from Central Europe who learned, their introduction to music were the great romantic composers of Europe. So Korngold, who wrote King's Row, and he was a refugee, and it's very interesting. One of the most interesting film scores from the 1940s is actually one that Aaron Copland did for Our Town. And it's really, it's very much in the Copland style, and it's really different. It fits very well with the play, and it's interesting because the Hollywood studio, I don't know which one it was that produced it, again thought that Copland's music would be too challenging. His opening title music would be too challenging for the audience. They needed something splashier, so they went to some canned piece of sort of romantic style music, and it's totally wrong. But the music in the film fits it. And you start to have that in the 50s. You have, Bernstein writing, I Could Have Been a Contender, On the Waterfront, and so on. And gradually things change. Then you have the beginning of electronic scores and so on.
Thank you.
John, this might be outside the scope of your expertise, but you do see polymaths like William Herschel and others who were interested in the sciences, but also interested, and Albert Einstein, who was quite a good violinist. Do you think that plays a part in those who are writing music for space, for science?
I think it does to a degree, only because I think the fields are kind of connected somehow. I mean, Herschel isn't the only example. Galileo's father was an eminent musician. I tried to convince my son of this, but he reminded me I'm not eminent. When you have in the two subjects were considered to be very closely related in the old academic days in the Renaissance, the typical university education, right? Music and astronomy were two of the four sciences, and the quadrivium, right? I just think there has always been a kind of music is, it was considered one of the sciences because it was the science of ratio, really, the overtone series and so on. And it is far and away the most mathematical of the arts. You know, if you listen to a piece like The Art of the Fugue or the Goldberg Variations or something like that, right? It's elegant in a way that visual art, for instance, never would be. And that's not a knock on visual art. It just, elegance is not a word in the same context that you would think to apply to a painting.
John, there's a question in the chat.
Yeah. Oh, let me look. I'm sorry. I thought you were. Oh, yes. It was called Opera as Drama. That's a book by Joseph Kerman, Kerman, who died maybe 10, 15 years ago or something. It's a wonderful book. You may not agree with his tastes on opera. Like I said, he's very curmudgeonly, but you know, highly recommended. Also, another really good book on this is, some of you may have read, is it's called The Unanswered Question, and it's the Norton lectures that Leonard Bernstein gave at Harvard in 1973. It's also available as they were broadcast on TV. I remember watching them when I was in middle school. And you know, that's a really, really good introduction to kind of the interrelation of music as an abstraction and meaning, emotional affect. You know, I would recommend those two books. There's lots of others. It depends kind of on what you're interested in. Another book that's interesting in this way, by the way, is you know, I don't know if it's outdated in the computer. I'm sure it's outdated because it's from 1980. But Gödel Escher Bach, right, by Douglas Hofstadter, I thought was a really good book, and it does get in a really interesting way at, you know, what makes Bach Bach. So there's lots of places, you know, that you can go with this, but those are three things off the top of my head. I don't know if any people here have read that book recently. I haven't read it in a long time, so I don't know if it has anything new to say about, you know, artificial intelligence.
There is a newer version of it. It was republished or released in a second edition. I keep promising myself I'm going to attack it again, and this time finish it. Last time I think I got mired about a third of the way in.
Well, one of my favorite things in it, and it's just comic, but it's really funny, is he transcribes a Bach fugue as a conversation, and he manages to sort of hit all of the sort of musical conventions, like a pedal point and so on, in a really funny way. I'm just thinking also, if you look at individual composers, they, you know, look at their works and read about their works, you can find that they all have their own really interesting interrelation of the abstract and meaning. You know, there's some examples like Shostakovich, for instance, who actually supported his family for a while playing piano in a silent movie house. You know, that's kind of, for me, the key to understanding all his music, or Charles Ives or Schumann, that their music has an inner life to it that's all connected with the abstract choices they make. And it's, you know, it's really interesting to look at their pieces and see how sort of complex layered meaning can be achieved. I'm looking, was any other question here that...
There is a question in the chat. And Ennio Morricone died last week.
Yeah.
There's some beautiful film scores by him. And Hans Zimmer, it's Hans Zimmer, but I think it's Hans Zimmer does a great job. Who's your favorite soundtrack composer?
See that, yeah. That's a really good question. I don't know if I have a favorite one. I just, I loved Morricone. I mean, I think he was fabulous. I like him more for the most part than Hans Zimmer, but that's not really, a knock on Zimmer. I just loved Morricone's aesthetic, which is much more, much closer in a way to mine, I guess, that has this kind of cartoonish, bizarre quality to it, and very, different from kind of the Hollywood aesthetic in a way. A lot of European filmmakers. Oh, another really good film score composer who was a famous concert composer was the Japanese composer Takamitsu, who wrote. If you've ever seen the movie Ran, the Kurosawa movie, he wrote that score. That's a fabulous score, and his style is really well suited to that. I admire all of them. I mean, because one of the things that's really tough about being a film score composer is you can't plot out the structure of your music the way that, if you're writing a symphony, let's say, you don't write, you're writing from the top down and the bottom up at the same time. And you can sort of have feedback between what you're doing at the detail level and what role it has to play in the piece as a whole. But you can't do that in a movie because the director's always adding and subtracting scenes from one part of the movie and say, all right, we need, 5 more minutes of music right here, So film score composers need to really adapt that way. And they also need to subject themselves in a way to the director's aesthetic. It's why directors like to work with specific composers, I think, because they find the right ones, basically.
Somebody had the question, Mike Tucker asked it. Have you researched helioseismology, which is learning about the sun through sound waves?
Right. I have, to say I've researched it, it would be a tremendous overstatement, but I have read about it a little bit. And I'm very interested in how, some things scientifically can be better perceived without help as sound than they can as sight. Something, things like the period of pulsars, right? Because you can just hear it as a pitch, and it's really easy to hear the difference between one that's going 35 times a second and one that's going 45 times a second, which is not so easy to see. Helioseismology is a really interesting thing, but it's for the same reason as that it's effective. We can't see, in that case, we can't learn from seeing what we can learn from hearing, basically. Of course, it's not really audible. It's at something like, when you hear sun sounds, basically they've been transposed up about 1,000 octaves or something. The sounds are subsonic, but it's interesting how it's usable as a tool for astronomy.
They did something like that after the gravitational waves were discovered. I recollect they released the sound of the gravitational waves by modifying the tones and shifting them. Lori Widener said she's interested in learning more about the impact of the aspects of musical theory like intervals and chord progressions. How could she learn more about those kinds of details?
The impact on composing, on how music means, basically. Exactly.
Lori, why don't you unmute yourself and clarify what you mean?
Thank you. The different effects, like the effect of using a single note, to minimalism to, increase the tension, and, using intervals of, sixths and sevenths to create tension. How do you learn, how could I learn more about that so that as I'm creating my own music or listening to music, I will more easily identify those details?
I think the best way, if you're a musician, which you are, right?
Yes.
You is to identify. I've never come across what I thought was a really good composition textbook, and I've actually, in the course of my life, I've had a lot of teachers I liked as people, but I've only had one who I thought was really good as a composition teacher. It's a really tough subject to teach, I think what you need to do is identify the pieces you like what what you like about them, and study really hard. And I don't mean to sound, it kind of sounded condescending. I mean, I do the same thing. Study each piece really hard and see what is it that makes it work that way, right? That's kind of what I kind of tell my, I don't have a lot of composition students at a community college, but I do tell them, the ones that I have, and all our music majors, you don't have the luxury as a music major of just liking what you hear, right? And we don't, as musicians, have that luxury. So I think that's the best thing. With classical music, it's easier than with a lot of current kinds of music, only because we have scores. So you can, you can get the scores and say like, all right, I gotta look at this and get my, I know there is a bookstore in New Hope. I forget what it's called. It begins with an F, where they have like all of the Dover scores, or at least the last time I went there, like I can't even go there because I'm afraid I'll buy it out. I mean, so it's identifying those pieces, and you can find lead sheets and things like that for, and probably your ear, you can figure them out anyway. But so any pieces that, you're interested in, just think about what's the effect and how is it being done, right? It's kind of, that's what I would say. I mean, I don't know, there might be a book somewhere that talks about this, but it's also kind of an idiosyncratic thing in a way.
Agreed. It's not something that you can necessarily just look up on the list and say, oh, well, I want to create this effect. But I was interested in, determining more. So I understand your advice to listen to pieces and see how they make me feel, and then identify what is happening musically.
It's funny, but one of like my formative musical influences, I'm embarrassed to say, was the music from Bugs Bunny cartoons. And there was a CD that came out in the 1980s when I was in grad school, of all the scores by Carl Stalling, who did most of them, and some of the things, like there was whenever he had like a desert island scene, he would always use or like a jungle scene. He would always use the Hebrides Overture by Mendelssohn, which is about Scotland, right? Bum 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 ba da bum 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 ba da bum. Like, why? I don't know, but it's really interesting what connects in people's heads sometimes.
Right. Thank you.
Welcome.
Lori, I sent you a PM in response. Let's see, what else?
Farley's.
Jeremy asked if it was Farley's. It's Farley's Bookshop.
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Jan put a question in.
Okay.
What
that's right.
happened to the score for 2001 that Kubrick discarded?
Oh, I've heard it. Every time I think I said something in the lecture along the lines of like, poor Alfred North, but he does make money every time the movie is shown, even though not a note of score is heard.
Really?
Yeah, because a contract is a contract, right? But he I've heard parts of it, and it's it's really interesting. I'm not sure. I can't imagine the movie with the score that North wrote for it. I've heard it, and it's it's not that it's bad, but now it's like, how can you watch that scene without the Blue Danube? And that's the problem that North had, because Kubrick had been using those pieces to edit the movie. So once he got something from North, it couldn't possibly be what it was that he wanted. That's another big issue. And Kubrick, of course, was famously a perfectionist, I think is a very polite way of saying it, who everything had to be exactly right or he wouldn't use it. So, but I mean, if you can probably find somewhere online the main title from his version of Also sprach Zarathustra, right? And I've heard it. It's just the thing that was so tough about that is that Strauss's piece, the beginning, it's only the beginning of the piece, but it's so elemental. It's supposed to depict a sunrise on a mountain. That's what the original depiction was. It's so pure and elemental that how could you possibly imitate it? It's kind of like, and North gave it a good shot, but it doesn't, and it's good music, but it doesn't sound like that piece, basically.
Anybody else? By the way, the entirety of Also Sprach Zarathustra is an amazing piece of music.
My favorite.
People only ever hear the first 2 minutes, but it's an amazing piece of music.
It's 35 minutes long or so, and it's extraordinary, and it's an amazingly nervy thing to write a piece that has its climax first minute and 37 seconds, right?
Right.
It is great. I'm not a huge Richard Strauss guy, but that's far and away my favorite piece of his.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. For sure. Any other questions? Anything in the YouTube chat, Jeremy?
No questions from there.
Okay. Well, John, thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed this. I didn't have to know any math, any physics, and those are my favorite kind of presentations at the Astronomy Club. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Does anybody have... everybody's clapping. That's cool. Those who have their video on. So that's great. Does anybody have anything else for the good of the order? Hopefully we'll see you guys at Cherry Springs if the clouds clear and the cloud bringer doesn't return with his 3-foot Dob that drove in the clouds last time we were up there. Anybody else for the good of the order? Then I will remind you what we typically do, which is the social distancing Zoom equivalent of gathering at Manila's mainline diner, which is we terminate the YouTube feed, and those of us who wish to hang out on Zoom for as long as they want. It's our Zoom account. Nobody can kick us out. So you're welcome to hang out with the nerds and enjoy the rest of Friday evening, otherwise with us or without us. Thanks very much for coming. We'll be back in August with, I'm very excited about Laura Kerber. She went to Iran with my son, who is a professional musician in New York, and a third person from JPL. And they were looking for rock formations in Iran. And they went before this administration was in, when you could go to Iran and come back to the United States. And my son said it was an absolutely amazing trip, something he's wanted to do his entire life. And Laura is, I've chatted with her, she's absolutely brilliant. And this project she's doing for Mars could well be something that happens, a lander that actually happens. She's been working on some really interesting stuff. So should be great in August. Hope to see you all then. So thanks very much for coming. And Jeremy, you can kill the YouTube feed.
All right, we're going to shut down YouTube.